Hello, sinners, and hail Sappho. It's your hostess with the mostest, Narcissa DeVille. So this week's episode, as I promised, I'm going to be doing reviews of basically every episode of Helluva Boss up until this point. I've already done episodes 8 and 9, which you can see here. Was it 8? Yeah, 8 and 9. Didn't really care for 8, loved 9. So I'm going to be going backwards. I'm sure some people would probably prefer that I start from episode 1 and work my way forwards. But let's face it, that's not what this channel is. This is my channel. I do whatever the hell I want. So I'm going to be starting with episode 7 and working my way backwards. And honestly, episode 7, which is the Mammon's magnificent mid-season musical, try saying that 5 times fast, is one of my favorite episodes. It's not the favorite of the season or the series, but it is one of my favorites. And I actually took copious notes when I was rewatching this last night because usually my reviews are just kind of vibes based. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, people obviously seem to enjoy that, but, you know, it's not like a review, if you will. And obviously, since this is a Mammon heavy episode, I'm going to be wearing, I'm wearing this green dress. I'm going to be doing a green eyeshadow look using my Earthy palette by Beauty Bay. First of all, can I just say, I know this is I don't talk about makeup a lot on this channel, even though I'm doing my makeup a lot and I love makeup so much. This palette and all of these big ass Beauty Bay palettes are so much better than they have any business being. It's kind of unbelievable to me. And I am such a makeup fiend, a makeup snob, if you will. I have a lot of makeup that I have owned over the years. I've thought about doing a video ranking every single makeup brand that I have ever used, because there's definitely a lot of makeup brands that I have used that I think are overhyped. So I think it'd be very interesting to do kind of my own personal review, because I would not call myself a makeup artist. I do consider what I do to be drag adjacent, but I'm not a makeup artist. I'm by no means a professional. So for me, it's kind of I'm just your average consumer. And yes, I do my makeup a little more fiercely than maybe your average. But in that respect, I think I still have pretty high expectations of what things should be doing and what they should look like. And I do think there's a lot of brands out there that are very overrated. And there are a lot of brands that maybe are underrated to me, or at least not as beloved, and you don't hear people talking about them. But maybe that's because I'm not really in the beauty world anymore. I would consider, I don't know what part of YouTube I'm under anymore, but it's certainly not the beauty world. Which is fine by me, because there's so much goddamn drama that I just I don't have the time or energy to give a shit about. Let's get into the review itself. I did take notes. I do have kind of a lot to say. A lot of this is probably going to be going based on my memory of the episode and my general feelings about it. But I have to say, I fucking love this episode. It's such a fun episode. And it's funny because I've talked a lot about how I don't really care for musicals, right? And it's funny because I feel this series, and certainly Has Been Hotel, are not the series to watch if you're not someone who likes musicals. I actually really like the musical numbers in this episode, despite the fact that I'm kind of iffy about musicals. And actually, I feel this episode is kind of a perfect example of the type of musical music that I like, because I feel they feel like they could be played on the radio. And that's kind of my preference for songs in a musical. I want something that feels like you could hear it on the radio and enjoy it separate from the show itself. That's kind of what I'm looking for, and that's what I enjoy, is a song that I could listen to completely separate from the show and still enjoy it. So this episode begins with Blitz and Fizz as teenagers, and we get to see them going to a Mammon concert. This actually has one of my favorite visual gags I have ever seen, because Mammon is talking about how he wants to have a clown pageant, and he says that girls need not apply because women just aren't funny, and we see that undercut by the tag of written by Vivian Medrano, who obviously is a woman, which I think is so fucking hysterical. I think that's such a excellent use of like visual comedy. Like I can never get over how funny that is. And you know what? Good for her, because I think the show is extremely funny, obviously. And so that joke of like just, you know, he thinks women aren't funny and yet the show is written by a woman, you know, I think that's so iconic. And I do love this scene. I love the whole moment of getting to see Fizz, who is just so enamored by Mammon. And it really kind of explains, I think, so much about the relationship between FizzaRolli and Mammon and kind of like what all this means to him and why it's so important to him. I just think that's very, very interesting. And it's very telling of like what's to come later in the episode. And a lot of things that I think we certainly did not know about Fizz. So I kind of love this dynamic. I love seeing, you know, Fizz kind of before everything happened to him. And he's so like chipper and carefree, but also he seems very like anxious and nervous. And, you know, he doesn't necessarily like to be the center of attention. It's just something that's kind of been thrust upon him. And then we get to see this whole interaction between him and his stalker. Now, as everyone has pointed out before me, this is actually based on a real life situation that Vivian herself experienced with a stalker. But what I do think is interesting is that actually in the past week, we got to experience a in the wild version of a human being who is like this Creepso character, not in the terms of like a stalker, but in terms of this person who like has his own idea of what a character should be and is very, very offended that they're not that. And that came out when was it this week or was it last week? I'm kind of forgetting, I think, my timeline. I think it was last week because it was during Pride and they released a Helluva Boss, really gorgeous, gorgeous character thing of all the characters and kind of like them wearing outfits inspired by, you know, what, I don't want to say Pride alignment, but like, so, you know, we got to learn that Sally Mae is a trans lesbian. Icon, same. We love it, sister. A lot of the characters are more pansexual. What really caused the drama and outrage was learning that Luna is bisexual. And apparently a fan took that very, very personally and just really embarrassed himself all over Twitter, just like losing his goddamn mind about the fact that Luna is bi and like how it's, you know, Luna is such a comfort character to him and it ruins her character. And I'm just like, bro, really? And it's such an interesting juxtaposition, especially with this episode and everything that it's talking about. And like, you know, the Creepzo character in this episode is clearly someone who has his own idea of who Fizz should be, and Fizz has to match with what he thinks he should be. And so to see that in real life with, you know, a character like this, it's just so wild to me.
And like for the record, I don't think that anyone would have had even anything to say about this tweet if not for the fact that he was so upset about Luna's character being bi. Like, really and truly, this person was not followed by a lot of people. It does not seem like anybody really would have cared or even noticed this response if not for the rampant biphobia.
And also, I think it's interesting because, you know, this man in the show is very aggressive with Fizz. You know, he's grabbing him. He's, you know, just being like very uncomfortable. And like, as a woman, I do watch that and I'm like, oh God, like I know how terrifying it is when men are just like aggressive and in your face like that. And it's just kind of like interesting to me because you don't see that type of story a lot with like queer male characters, even though you know that shit happens. And so to watch it with Fizz, and it's like, wow, you know, I do think it has like a lot of, I just think it's a really powerful scene. I think it's really important. And I really, really enjoy this whole like scene. I love seeing Blitz stick up for Fizz. You know, I love him kind of telling him like, you don't have to be perfect. You know, you are amazing just as you are. And like, you know, but it's very clear that he wants to impress Mammon. He wants to be this like perfect idea of what Mammon expects him to be. And I think that certainly plays into the episode as a whole. And then of course we go from there to a ad for Fizz and his FizzBots, and we kind of get to see just like everything that entails. And I think it's very interesting. And, you know, I did write in my notes, obviously we haven't quite gotten there yet, but I do think it's very interesting when you like learn that Oz wasn't actually comfortable making these FizzBots. And I have to wonder like how that came about and like what the nature of all of that contract is, because he doesn't seem to like Mammon very much. And Fizz does say that he doesn't think he would have the relationship with Oz were it not for Mammon. Like he never would have met him, is kind of the implication that I get, which to me does beg the question, like, you know, was that part of why Oz signed the contract to agree to do the FizzBots? Was like he met Fizz somehow and then, you know, I've read so many fanfics about how it happened, and like I certainly have had my own theories that I've written over the years, over, you know, the last few months, and just kind of like the idea that maybe they first met when, after Fizz's accident, and he needed his first set of robotic limbs, and that obviously Oz would have helped in that, because they do say that he was built by Oz. Fizz says that a couple of times. His FizzBot says it, but also it is implied in the Aussies episode in season 1 that Fizz's arms were built by Oz. So it's definitely something where that part of it seems like it's always been true, which I find very interesting. It seems like Oz kind of was always responsible for that, which is also like very cute and like a cute idea of how they met. I will say this, one thing, again, I'm going to be skipping around even though I have notes. I'm kind of like talking things as I remember them. One thing I do find interesting is there is an implication later in the episode when Fizz is singing his song. There's an implication that he maybe had some drinking problems after the accident, which I think would be very, very interesting, and like how that might have affected their relationship, if it did, and kind of like, is Oz the reason he got sober, and just all different kinds of things. You know, there's so much we don't know still. And I really enjoy Fizz heavy episodes. I do. I like Stolitz as much as everyone, but I don't know. There's something about Fizz and his character and his relationship with Oz that I just really enjoy seeing. So like, I'm not mad that this episode and the episode prior are very Fizz heavy. I hope that we get to see more of Oz and Fizz, to be honest with you. But anyway, it's interesting to see kind of just their past, but also just like what makes Fizz tick. You know, he's already starting to have this anxiety about the fact that he has to be in this pageant, and he feels like he has to be perfect. And, you know, Oz is just kind of like trying to help him, but it's very clear that Fizz really doesn't want to hear it. And so Oz decides to call Blitz in order to get him to kind of get Fizz to open up, which I think is really cute. I'm glad that they introduced this kind of moment of having Blitz there as like, you know, yeah, I know you haven't been there for the last 15 years and really it's just been me, but, you know, hey, can you help me out here? I kind of love that. I respect that. And it's funny when Oz says you've been living rent free in his head for 15 years. So I can't help but feel like, you know, you're important to him. And there is like a tone of bitterness in Oz's voice when he says that. And I don't think it's jealousy, but I think there is kind of that like, you know, you're obviously someone who I feel like fucked him over, And I don't really care for that, but it's very clear that he still misses that friend. And I can respect that about Fizz. I definitely have friends that, we had falling out. We had a falling out, but I still miss them. Like, you can just miss people that you don't talk to anymore. That's just part of life, I guess I say, is if it's not part of my life. That's just, part of life, is like sometimes you miss people who you were close to, regardless of how things ended, regardless of how long it's been since you've spoken to them. That's just sometimes how it is. You just miss people. And, it sucks, but that's certainly part of being an adult. There's just something about Oz and Fizz's relationship, and a lot of people have talked about it as, like, they're a great narrative foil to Blitz and Stolas because they are so healthy. But I do think there's a very good chance that it was not always that way. Like, I think it's very, very likely that they were not always this, paragon of the perfect couple, because it doesn't, necessarily start in a vacuum. And I think it's going to be interesting to see them explore how they got started as a couple, and maybe see, like, as much as they're doing great now, that was not necessarily always the case. There was some struggles, I'm sure. And it'll be nice to see that. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, so do not even ask. I think I'm just trying to highlight more things, even though this is all going under my foundation. I look like a cat. Oh, God. It's Narcissa DeVille Presents Cats, which I've never seen and never will see. No desire, thank you so much. Although, these claws. I have missed having my nails on, let me tell you. It's been far too long. I won't get into all of that. I imagine, I don't know. Ghostfuckers doesn't seem to be... It's going to show some of Fizz and, like, his accident, but I'm assuming, since it's more like Blitz's POV, that it's not going to really get into kind of everything that happened, which is unfortunate. She's very highlighted. It's very hard to do your makeup when you're wearing bangs. I do kind of love, by the way, when we finally get them entering the pageant, I love the line that Blitz is like, "Why are you here again?" to Fizz, and fucking Oz is like, "Well, he was able to protect you when I wasn't there, so I figured he would be the next best thing." And Blitz is just like, he would be the next best thing? Pretty sus, babe. I love that fucking line. I think that's so fucking funny. Because, Fizz absolutely can tell that his boyfriend is bullshitting him. But he's not entirely calling him out, which I find funny. I will say, Oz mentions, like, "Oh, I want someone to be there with you since I'm not able to be." And I am kind of curious, like, where is he going? What is he doing? Because, like, after everything that happened in the last episode, and he said, like, I would imagine he would not want to be very far from Fizz. So I have to really ask, like, why? What are you doing that you're not going to be there during this time? Like, it's never really explained. And I guess, like, Oz definitely has things he needs to do. And, like, obviously we do see him coming. Not like that. We do see him, come around towards the end. So I kind of feel like not being there, I don't know what the purpose of that was. You know what I mean? Because, like, he does end up showing up in the end to help Fizz. So it's just kind of like, okay, we got rid of him for a minute, but actually he's going to come back. And, like, I'm glad that he does. And I have to assume the reason he knew was because Blitz called him. But I don't know. I find that really funny that, like, we have no idea why Oz is like, okay, I gotta go. Oh, fuck, man. Damn it. Oz is just like, okay, I gotta go. And you're like, okay, but why? Why are you leaving your boyfriend in this very important time for him when he's already very clearly, not having a good time mentally? And you're gonna be like, sorry, gotta go, gotta work or something? Like, you couldn't spare however many hours this whole thing takes? And again, like, we know he doesn't like Mammon, so I still don't know exactly why he would have agreed to do all this, but, like, that's neither here nor there. First, we have one of the many examples of how Mammon mistreats Fizz. And I mean, we get the scene early on, and it's kind of played for a joke of like Mammon slipping up and saying, oh, you know, I have this new brand baby I can exploit, when he's coming up with the idea of, you know, wanting to start this pageant in the first place. You know, it's very clear he plans to exploit whoever wins, and he does, and we see that throughout the episode. But, you know, seeing kind of his abuse and him calling Fizz fat, and it's just like, bitch, where? And like, again, it is meant to be this emotionally manipulative moment, him doing this and calling Fizz fat and saying, oh, you know, people like the Fizzy skinny, and so therefore you have to lose weight. And I'm just like, here's the thing, is like, I just simply do not believe, and again, I get that it's emotional manipulation, that is the point, but I simply do not believe that this cheap asshole cares enough about the bots being so model accurate that if he were to gain weight for any reason, that he would have to change them. Like, and he even says that there are versions that are sold that are, you know, fat. So one has to assume somebody would buy that. He very clearly says, like, people want them skinny. And it's like, well, if you sell versions that are not at all like Fizz, it seems like they can have whatever weight that they need to in order to sell. I don't know. I know I'm nitpicking here. And again, it's not like because I don't like it. It's not because I think it's not good. I just think it's kind of funny. But also it does speak to how manipulative this character is, that he feels like he has to tell Fizz what he should weigh, despite the fact that that has nothing to do with, you know, these robots. You know, it's just very tragic, but it's such an important story, and I think kind of talks about, like, not even just like hero culture, but I think it's just an important story of like how badly this person in Fizz, you know, he constantly talks about how he needs to be perfect, and he doesn't want to let Mammon down because he feels like he owes him so much. And of course, you know, we see later on in the episode what that's all about and why he feels like he owes him so much. And it's really tragic. And I think it's also really real, is like, you know, there is such an exploitative thing sometimes in like art. I will say, and I wrote this in my notes, honestly, I think of all the Helluverse characters, Mammon is my least favorite, second only to Valentino. Like, they are both, to me, shitty assholes and greedy assholes. Now, I will say, we also get to meet in this scene Fizz's competition, or his main competition, which is Glitz and Glam. You know, they're two, like, fish creatures from Envy. They are not particularly likable, and yet at the same time, I think they're kind of like funny in a weird, that's so dark, but there is something about them that's kind of like funny. Like, they're just so like comically evil, just like I think Mammon himself. And like, I get it, it's hell, but like there is something that's just like very like over the top evil about these characters. And we also get our first song, which is Juggling is Cool. And honestly, this is, you know, of the songs, it's probably, I wouldn't say it's my least favorite of this episode. I do think it's a fun song. It's pretty funny. My favorite is probably going to be an unpopular opinion of like this episode, but it is really a good song. And again, it, like I said, it does kind of prove my point, which is that my favorite songs tend to be songs that, you know, I don't know where on the radio they would play this or why, but I could see this being on the radio completely devoid of the show itself. It's just something about it that like feels like it's just so well done to me. So I really like Juggling is Cool. And I think my favorite line is probably everyone's favorite line, which is, holy moly, things are not looking good for FizzaRolli. I just think that's so fucking funny. I also really enjoy, we don't get to see the other like clowns, but I do kind of love some of the like ideas for the other clowns and what they look like, because some of them look like there's just demons that are just like, clown is their entire demonic presence, which I think is funny, which I guess makes sense because there's a lot of people terrified of clowns, so I guess it would make sense that there's just a whole breed of demon that's just like clown. I also love how the twins do this like pie gag thing, and we get a Flashdance reference, which pretty much everyone has ever done. But I like Fizz's best because I love the fact that he like gets just all the pie all over him. I think that's so genius and brilliant and funny. And I think that is something that Oz enjoys watching over and over again after this. Because it's just like, it's a vibe. It's really a vibe. She always talks about deepening blush in the pocket, and you know what? I'm starting to agree with her. Yeah, you know what? I'm here for this. So then, after this whole montage with juggling is cool, we see Fizz very clearly having his breakdown. We see him having to deal with kind of the disrespect of other demons as he's doing his kind of meet and greet. He's very good at it, even though he's like very clearly in a bad mental health space. But I do love seeing the whole scene with him and the little deaf boy. We also get the reintroduction of Creepso again, because of course we do. And I do think it's interesting how, you know, his whole thing, and it kind of is what kicks off his mental breakdown to the highest caliber or the highest extent, is like, you know, this guy who, it's very clearly revealed in this scene that like he very much just wanted his idea of who Fizz should be and not who Fizz actually was. And he very clearly wanted Fizz to be like his servant. And it's just like, oh God, it's so real, but also so disturbing. And I hate that for Fizz. And I do love that Blitz is there to kind of just take care of him and help him as much as he can. And it is interesting that when Mammon does come along, the first thing that he checks is his body, and therefore the part that he has any interest in, any vested interest in, not the actual, you know, Fizz himself. He even checks under his skirt, so it's like, or the like jester kind of top he's wearing, like it's just even more invasive. And it's like, that's not surprising, but it's also like the implications of all these things really add up to a very disturbing picture. Again, not surprising, but very disturbing and upsetting, like when you actually stop to think about these things. And of course, you know, we see Mammon kind of acting like he's trying to take an interest and care about Fizz, but it's very clear that he just cares about Fizz insofar as Fizz may be, you know, jeopardizing him making money. And so he's like, okay, I'll let Glitz and Glam go on first, and you can, you know, figure your shit out. And it's just like, I just do not like his character. But you know what? I get it. It's important. We get this whole scene where we get our second song of the season, or this episode, not the season, this episode. And it's, I hate how much I like Clown Bitch. I really, really do. I hate how much I like this song. It's such a fucking good song. And I really, really hate that, because these characters are such assholes. But I think it's honestly one of my favorite songs of this episode. Like, I would argue probably I'm almost willing to say it's my favorite song of the entire episode. And I know that's like such a controversial take, but I kind of think it's my favorite song of this episode, which is hilarious, but I don't know. It's just such a bop, and it has no business being a bop. Again, because these characters are assholes. But then I think that's the same way I feel about Poison, is like, that song is such a bop, and it's so like dark-sided when you consider the lyrics and like the meaning of all of it. But it's a fucking bop. What can you do? Like, you know, should it be a bop? Maybe not, but it is. And like, it's a good fucking song. This is also where we get Oz coming in to help him. I really love this moment. I think it's so like important of like, you know, Oz isn't trying to, you know, he's just being there for him and reassuring him. You know, he's not trying to tell him how he should feel or that he's being ridiculous or anything like that. He's just supporting him. And that is so, so, so important. You know, we need that. We need more supportive characters like that. I do think it's very interesting, though, that, and people have talked about this before, it's interesting that Oz can't get his ass through the door, even though his shoulders are very clearly wider than his hips. That's such a funny thing to me. You know, we have our whole kind of climactic moment. Fizz is having his breakdown. Oz comes in to save the day. And we get one of our kind of shortest songs, but it's a very, very cute song, which is Crooked Heart. I'm going to say something controversial. I love Fizz and Oz. I really, really do. I love them as a couple. And I do enjoy this song. But as far as the songs on this episode go, this is not my favorite. I do kind of feel like this is a more musical song, so that's probably why it's not my favorite. It's not a terrible song by any means. It's just, I don't know. I think it's cute. I think it's kind of like, you know what it gives? It's kind of like how in Has Been Hotel, the song that Vaggie and Charlie sing is like the shortest song ever, and it's a cute little song, but it's just like there's not a lot to it, and it's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of disappointing in that way. I feel a little bit like that with this one, except I think Crooked Heart is a better song. And again, it's a song that I do enjoy and I would listen to more, but it's not the song that I have like on repeat from this episode, if anything. So I don't know. I know that's like a hot take. I love them as a couple, but I think you can love them as a couple and just feel kind of like it's a great song. It's just not my favorite. Like, you know, I don't think those are mutually exclusive. I love the, you know, moment. I love seeing them feel better and like Oz really showing that he cares, and Fizz just, you know, getting to see just like how much his insecurities have really been plaguing him, and it's been something that we haven't really realized because we haven't gotten to see that. And so it's very emotionally impactful, and I'm glad we got to see that. I'm glad we got to have this episode with Fizz and really got to enjoy and appreciate his character. And it is really nice, you know, especially watching this episode and thinking about the next episode where you get to see Fizz more kind of after all this and sort of how he's been handling it, and see him kind of relaxed and not like having to be in his like jester era. I think is really nice to see him kind of relaxed and kind of getting to be himself. So then of course, you know, as they're making out and kind of having this great moment, we get a break-in by the Creepso character again, who's threatening them. But thankfully, Blitz is hot on his tail, and when he shoots him in the head, it makes a little heart shape, the little hole in his head, which I kind of love. It's so dark and twisted, but I think it's so funny. And I do love how Blitz is like, oh, so you are a couple, acting like he's all pissed off about it. And then, of course, he calls them hypocrites, which is kind of true because of how they treated Moxie and Millie during the Aussies episode. Although at the same time, I do kind of think, like, you know what this club is, and it kind of does put them in danger if they have to keep their relationship a secret, to have a couple that's just singing about their love like that. So I don't know, but I don't think they hit it very well. Obviously, everyone in Lust knew it. I do love some of the headcanons that, like, everyone in Lust knows and they just low-key treat Fizz as their queen. I kind of love that personally. I will say, it seems like there were some, like in the previous episode, and I'm going to be talking about that more in that episode, there's a paper that, or a magazine that's the Lust Ring Times, where we get to see there's like an implication that people think that Fizz is like, you know, a gold digger and using Oz for his money, which I find to be so odd and also hilarious, because presumably Fizz was already famous before he met Oz. But secondly, I have to imagine that's something that happens, like Oz is the king, yes, but presumably being the king of lust, it's kind of the expectation that he sleeps around a lot. So the idea that people don't like Fizz because they think he's a gold digger just really strikes me as kind of funny. I don't know why. It's just kind of like, is that really the issue that people have with Fizz? Is that they think he's a gold digger? And it's like, but wouldn't anyone who's sleeping with the King of Lust potentially be someone who wants to extort him for money? Like, it's not like he can be in a scandal for sleeping with someone. Like, presumably he sleeps with people of all varieties when he has. I don't know. That's going to be something I'm talking about next week when I talk specifically about the episode Oops, which is, I'm just going to spoil it now, my favorite episode of the entire series, bar none. It's so good. I just love it, and I will talk about it, but first, I just have to finish this episode. So, obviously, we, after that, get the song 2 Minutes Notice. Now, I'm not going to go into being pedantic and saying how is it possible that Fizz had time to throw all this together, because obviously we see in the previous episode when he distracts the mafia demons that Fizz is very good at planning shit as he goes. I do think that made a little more sense because he worked with the materials that he had on hand and like what was around him in this big warehouse, whereas with this situation it does seem like he got shadow puppets involved, so it seems like Oz Oz obviously does help him. But it's just, there's a lot of things that I'm just kind of like, I don't know how you planned all that, but good on you. I'm not even mad about it. Like, again, it's being pedantic. It is a cartoon at the end of the day, so your suspension of disbelief is already higher, and your suspension of disbelief also has to be higher. It's a musical. Like, it's just, it is what it is. And I do love this song. 2 Minutes Notice is a bop. I think, like I said, it is probably my second favorite song of the entire episode. I'm sorry to say it. I think Clown Bitch is a little bit better. I do love 2 Minutes Notice, though. I think it's a really good song. And this is kind of the song that we get the implication that it's possible that Fizz had a drinking problem, because he's explaining kind of his past and how much he's very much given everything he had to Mammon, and he's drinking this like empty bottle, or attempting to. And so I think it does imply that maybe there was some kind of drinking issue brought about from the trauma of his accident, but also just the trauma of working for someone like Mammon, who very clearly, abuses and manipulates him. And I think all of those things combined probably have caused him to feel like, in the past, I have to drink in order to get through all this, which is really sad. And, I hope that is something that gets explored more going forward. I think that would be very interesting. Again, it's just such a beautiful number. It's so fun and like revelrous, and I love seeing that for Fizz. I love him getting to have that moment where he's like, you know what? Fuck you. I don't want to work for you anymore. I don't want to do this anymore where I have to be at your beck and call all the time. And a lot of people have also talked about how it's a very cathartic anthem for people with disabilities. It's a very cathartic anthem for a lot of different people. And that's kind of what I think makes Fizz such a amazing character, as like, he represents so many things to so many different people. Everybody can relate to in some type of way. He's just such an amazing character, and I just love him so much. So I love getting to see him have this moment, and I love getting to see him just really getting to thrive and, do what he wants to do and say, fuck you to Mammon. I think that's great. And I love the line where Mammon's just listening to it and he's like, I wonder what sorry asshole this is about. And Oz is like, it's about you. And he's like, wait, what? And then at the end, when he specifically calls out Mammon, Mammon gets pissed, but hearing all the cheers and he knows what kind of money this can bring him, he decides, like, I'm just going to tolerate it. It's not until Fizz gets in the way of his money and decides he's going to actually say, I quit, despite the song being about quitting, that's when Mammon really gets pissed and loses his shit and goes all like sin beast mode. And it's interesting getting to see this moment and, learn that he's a spider. And, it's interesting how we've kind of seen, I think at this point, all of the sins going in their full sin mode, as it were. We've gotten to see it with Lucifer. We've gotten to see it with Beelzebub. We've gotten to see it with Oz several times, including in this episode, which I think is really impactful. And then, of course, we've also gotten to see it with Mammon. It's interesting to see how pissed off he gets, especially when Fizz is like, look, I'm done. I've taken enough from you. And it's also very interesting because, like, you're holding this pageant with the understanding that anyone could potentially win over Fizz. You know what I mean? Like, he was all well and prepared to hire the twins, and he even treats Glitz and Glam like, they're doing really well. I really like them. Like, he's ready to hire them in a snap. So it's very interesting that it's specifically Fizz quitting that has him so mad when, like, yeah, I know you've invested a lot into them, but you certainly seemed before to act like there was a good chance that Glitz and Glam could have won this. And maybe you wouldn't have let them win just because, like, you expected, you had put all this work into Fizz. But I do have to wonder, like, has had Fizz just bombed his song, had he not done anything that interesting for that final performance, would Mammon have just let him win just because? Or would he have had to have put on glitz and glam anyway? Like, could Fizz have kind of quit without saying he quit and just gave a lackluster performance that nobody wanted to see? You know, Fizz goes out with a bang, and I think that's really great for him. But I just kind of wonder, like, what was Mam's, plan here? What did he expect was going to happen? He was planning, it seemed like he was very happy to go with glitz and glam in the first place. So why is it when Fizz specifically says he's going to quit, then it's a problem? I don't know. Again, I'm overthinking this. It's a cartoon. I get it. But it is just interesting to like have these conversations and wonder these things. That's just how my brain works. I love that Fizz does not even flinch. Even seeing him at his scariest form, after he has had this whole breakdown, he doesn't even flinch because he knows he has Oz at his back. And you see Oz going full fucking, beast mode, and he's like, you better back up because you are not going to disrespect my boyfriend like that. And I love it. And I love that, Mam really tries to threaten them. And he's like, if you don't fuck off, I'm going to tell everyone here, and Oz is like, what, that I love him? Well, I do. So get over it. I just love that. And it's like all the wind gets taken out of Mammon's sails with that. He's like, oh shit. Okay, well, I guess there's nothing else I really have. And yeah, he makes a threat, and I have to assume the threat is going to be, because it's him, because he's greed, I have to assume it's like monetary. Like he's just going to pull everyone who works for him out of Oz's business. I have to assume that, obviously their contract with the Fizz bots will end. Any contract with Glitz and Glam's bots is not going to go forward. So I don't think Oz is going to be pissed about that at all. But that's the only thing that I think that threat makes sense, because we've seen Lucifer's character, because I think in a lot of fanfic originally after this episode that I had read, the implication was like Lucifer was going to be told about this and he was going to be pissed at Oz. But I think what we've seen from his character, and certainly what I think makes the most sense for Lucifer's character, is that he probably already knew about Fizz and adores him and also doesn't give a shit. I feel like Mammon is very much probably the sin nobody really likes. Like, I mean, it's implied that Envy is probably going to be a dickhead too, which is unfortunate. But I do feel like there's a very good chance that Mammon is very much like the sin that the rest of the family does not care for. They do not fuck with him. Oz doesn't fuck with him, I can guarantee you. Beelzebub doesn't fuck with him. Like the cool sins. Lucifer, I doubt, fucks with him either. We haven't met Satan yet, but I like to imagine he probably doesn't fuck with Mammon. So like, he's on a plane of his own, and that is A-okay. And yeah, that's basically the episode. It kind of ends with us seeing Oz and Fizz getting to cuddle in the car. I love that we get to enjoy their little leitmotif that we kind of experienced earlier in the Oops episode. And also we get to see Stolas and Blitz's leitmotif a couple of times in the episode as well. I feel like the first time we get to really appreciate that leitmotif is in Stolas's song about being in a gilded cage. I feel like that's kind of that is the song that the leitmotif is based on, if I'm not mistaken. Again, I'm not a musical expert. I'm kind of just basing that on like what I can hear. And of course in the limo, we get Blitz asking who tops. Fizz is very annoyed by this. Oz seems to find it funny. I think we all know that it's Oz. As a fellow bottom, I can appreciate that. So that is the episode. That is the review. This is the makeup look. I really enjoy this episode. As I've said at the beginning, this is one of my favorite episodes. I think this episode and Oops before it are probably by far just my favorite episodes of the season. There's just something about, and there's a lot of episodes I like, but these two are like my absolute like favorite. I have literally watched Oops no less than like a dozen times at least. This episode, I think I've watched at least 4 or 5 times. But like, Oops is the one that, like, if nothing else, I would just watch that by itself just to watch it, especially like the first like 5 minutes, which again, I will talk about next week. But yeah, I really like this episode. I think this is such a beautiful episode. It's so much fun. Had a lot of good music. Clown Bitch is obviously, I think, my personal favorite. But you can tell me in the comments below, what is your favorite song from this episode? What is your favorite moment from this episode? Was there anything that I didn't talk about that you wish I had? And if you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to like this episode, comment down below, subscribe to this channel. You can also become a member of this channel. We have 2 tiers, the R-side tier and the ineffable tier. The R-side tier does get a little bit more. You get early access, some behind the scenes stuff. You can also join my Patreon, which is a members only channel. That's patreon.com/NarcissDeville. Patreon is where I'm going to be posting a lot of, you know, behind the scenes content for things that I have coming up. I'm very, very excited about some projects that I'm going to be working on. So please stay tuned there. And until next week, stay devilish and see you next Tuesday.